The Moist Meter is a proud partner of our comic book series Godslap and Plague Seeker. Both are available at badegg.co, link in the description. Welcome to the Moist Meter. Today we're taking a look at the new Spider-Man movie, Across the Spider-Verse. Now, the first movie, Into the Spider-Verse, is one of my favorite animated films of all time. That movie is a real special butterfly. That's one of the very unique instances where a film comes out that legitimately innovates in its genre, like pushes it to new limits that were previously thought impossible. Kind of like what The Matrix did 20 some years ago, where it had this new element that hadn't really been seen before and has now been emulated a ton since. That's what Into the Spider-Verse did. It dragged us fucking kicking and screaming into the future of what animation can look like, and it was beautiful. It's kind of like what the Fosbury flop did for the high jump, right? Like, it legitimately kind of changed the perception of what was possible in the genre for animation here. So, Across the Spider-Verse had some very big shoes to fill, and I'm happy to say it filled those shoes like a cavity. This is an extraordinary follow-up, and somehow manages to once again elevate in animation. It is so beautiful. There is not a single second that goes by in this movie that isn't jaw-droppingly gorgeous. Every frame is a beautiful masterpiece of art. It's unreal just how good this movie looks. But it's not just style with no substance. This movie really doesn't bring you a ton of action off rip. Like, there is a lot of course, action, but it actually puts a big focus on its narrative and its characters. And even when characters are just talking to each other, not only is the writing super tight, somehow just conversations feel like anime montage moments. They'll have like these damn near hand-painted moments where a character like Gwen is talking to her father, and the background's just constantly changing. Just these like dynamic backgrounds that have evolving art that really like makes the conversations feel like action moments sometimes. It's so cool. So now let's talk about the story, because I think they did a great job with the narrative here. It didn't feel like super familiar from the first film, where it just felt like they phoned it in and just did what worked in the first film again. You know, like an encore performance, a King Neptune moment from SpongeBob where it's like, oh, that Krabby Patty tastes so good, I'd want to eat it a second time, and then just fucking regurgitate it. This movie doesn't fall into that trap. It delivers a story that feels really at home with where the first movie leaves off. And now they have a new tool they can get even more creative with, which is the multiverse. It's now no longer this big mysterious thing in the world. They can get very silly with how they use it and make some absolutely dreamlike sequences as well. So they have a lot more Spider-Men come into the fold here, a whole goddamn society of them. So you're going to get a lot of Easter eggs and cameos, but it doesn't feel like too campy or too cheap, where they're banking off just like nostalgia for some of the cameos they throw in here or references. It's used in a clever way. I'm trying not to get into spoilers here, but I love how they've used the multiverse in this movie and made it a very strong narrative tool, as well as, of course, a tool to give you a bunch of other different animation mediums, because a lot of Spider-Man are animated differently in the multiverse. So you'll have some that are like damn near claymation at some points, right? Like you have wacky ways that they portray some of the Spider-Men, but they use it in a way that's not just like point and be like, I get that reference. Don't get me wrong, that shit is absolutely there, but it's not like egregious, and it does serve a purpose in the story itself. I also love the villain in this movie. He starts as just like a goofball, throwaway stinker of a character who's like trying to rob an ATM, and Miles isn't taking him super seriously, so he's kind of like beating his ass while he's texting on the phone because he's late for a meeting at school. And then that character just keeps snowballing into an extremely powerful villain. The guy is the definition of a late game champ. Like, as the movie continues, he himself continues to get stronger. He can throw these little holes that allow him to basically just ascend into a different plane of existence. He has like full mastery of the multiverse. He can send things and send people, send himself, send different body parts of himself through these holes that just keep reaching into different parts at will. It's super cool. And since the movie is so visually beautiful, it's a lot of fun to watch this villain fight. And even when he's not fighting, just watching him traverse the universe is really cool as well. I also like his personality because he's very much a goofball for the most part. He's making quirky little quips as well, not to like an annoying degree, like where it's grating, but to a degree where it's like, oh, this guy's, it's hard to even like be mad at him, right? Like he's got a sympathetic story, and it's hard to hate him because he's just kind of like a likable nerd. But he's just so powerful too. It's cool. So I really like what they did with the villain. And I really like what they did with Gwyn and Miles. So Gwyn gets a lot more screen time this time around. You see a lot from her dimension, which is stylistically very different from all the other dimensions you see. Every dimension has its own unique identity, which I really appreciate. So as you visit different dimensions, the visual thumbprint of that world changes, which is cool. Now Gwyn's story is, sad like all other Spider-Man stories. Gwyn has a lot of problems that she's dealing with her dad thinking that she may have been responsible for something very horrible. She ends up, turning into a multiverse super soldier, leaving all of her problems behind, which abandons her dad, and she wrestles with a lot of tough shit that goes on. And I really think they did a great job with Gwyn's character in fleshing out her, as well as the relationship between her and Miles. Miles is just an outstanding character. I love everything they do with this character. The writing is amazing. A lot of times when there's like a teenage character going through that like rebellious stage, it's kind of annoying to watch for me personally. But with Miles, he doesn't really have that stage. Like, yeah, there's that, like, fuck you, mom and dad, why can't you just let me grow up kind of shit. But it's handled very differently than the normal tropey way of doing it, which is such a breath of fresh air. I can't stand that shit where it's like that cliche of a teenager. My mom and dad don't understand me. Those goobers just don't get it. It's not a phase. And then that becomes like the whole character's personality. Miles doesn't fall into that at all. It's like the decisions he makes and the way he goes about his journey is very well crafted. He understands where his parents are coming from for the most part. It's just he has to wrestle with the perpetual lying to them about his identity and hiding that huge part of his life from them. So I just really like all the characters. I love the story, and of course I love the visuals. Another thing that I really enjoy is something that the first movie did as well, but they do in this movie even better, which is weaving music into the actual living, breathing nature of the visuals. So the music is integrated so well. Like, you'll have visuals sync up to the songs where you'll just have like all kinds of different moving pieces to an action scene sync up to the music at moments, or as things build up in a crescendo in a song, the visuals start building up with like the animation style starting to blend together and get real fucking wacky. It's so cool. It's so fucking cool. The movie is just beautiful. I absolutely love the film, but I do have a major complaint, and I'm unfortunately not going to be able to dive into it super deep because it's big spoilers. But I do want to scratch the itch and get to it on a base level, so I'm going to talk about it, and it is minor spoilers even going over it, so this is your spoiler warning. It has to do with the end of the film. I think everything in this movie is great, top tier, but it falls into something that I feel a lot of movies are starting to do, where the entire last act of the film builds up beautifully. It's introducing secondary bad guys that are really interesting, really cool, a lot of amazing moments going on, bringing back some familiar characters. It's going, it's got all this momentum, and then it starts spending a lot of that time focusing on just leading you to the sequel. The movie is not going to be the last in the Spider-Verse series. There's going to be another one, I imagine, assuming this movie does well, which I think it will. And the movie knows that. So it just ends. In the middle of all of this buildup, in the middle of all of these ingredients being put into the stew, it just ends. Because it's setting up for the next film. It does have like a cool sign-off at the end, but not a satisfying one. And this is something I feel a lot of movies are starting to do, where it's setting up for the next movie, so it ends up taking some wind out of its own sails by giving you a conclusion that's not really a conclusion and isn't super satisfactory after the whole journey you've just gone through. You don't get that big payoff at the end. Now, this worked for Infinity War because at the end you still had a climactic showdown. You had a big battle, and the good guys lost, and it led into the next film. In this movie, there's no big climax moment. There's no big climactic final showdown where something just goes awry and now we're gonna leave you on the edge of your seat fucking salivating waiting for the next movie. This movie was still in the building process. So it really feels like this movie didn't have that climax, at least not when it comes to like a spectacle finale or anything. The characters by the end of it are in a very different place than they were at the beginning, you know, in terms of like what they're. I'm really trying not to get too deep into spoilers. The characters are very different by the end of the film than they are in the beginning, but there was never that big climax. So when the credits rolled, I felt like it was a little underwhelming because we hadn't had any like big moment to lead into the next one. It was still putting all these pieces of the puzzle together and bringing new things into the fold for the climax coming up. So at least in my opinion, that's how I feel, that it was just a bit like abrupt, where I was ready to keep watching. Like I thought there was going to be, you know, a big moment about to pop off, and then they pulled that punch to save it for the next film. So it felt like it was, I don't know, it felt like it really just wanted to be there to lead to the next film, and that takes some of the wind out of its own sails, if you ask me. By no means does it ruin the film or anything like that. By no stretch of the imagination is this a deal breaker for Across the Spider-Verse. I just felt a bit disappointed that it kind of just existed towards the end to push to the sequel. That just was a little upsetting, but it's not the biggest deal in the world because the movie is still absolutely outstanding. So plugging Across the Spider-Verse and the Moist Meter, I'm giving it a nice 90%. I think this is a must-watch animated film. Even if you're not a huge animated film fan, the movie is still just got so much to offer. I can't recommend it enough. It is such a unique experience, and I think they've done an incredible job with it. It's super fucking good. So yeah, that's about it. So yeah. Huge thanks to ourselves for sponsoring this Moist Meter. Godslap is a comic series written by myself, Jackson, Matt, Danny, and Aubrey Sitterson. It follows the story of a character named Aeus, who's an extremely powerful slapper in a world where slapping is king. Issue 3 just dropped. It's all available at badegg.co, and shit is starting to pop off. Aeus is being hunted by a mysterious foe named Defister, who, after swan diving through a hospital, picks up Aeus' trail and hunts him to the ends of the earth with his sidekick Olfactor. And also, our newest comic series, Plague Seeker, just came out. Issue 0 is available at badegg.co. It's written entirely by myself and edited by Jackson. It's set in a world 1,000 years after an apocalyptic event known as the Calamity. An asteroid hits Earth, and it brought with it mutations that changed all of its inhabitants. Now the world is infested with things called plagues, and atop the food chain sits 8 great plagues that control the entire world, and only one man stands against them, the Plague Seeker, who has an insatiable appetite to devour those 8 great plagues. So all of this is available at badegg.co, so please check it out. So yeah.